Document. Part 6. Jake's cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the alien device. Laura sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from her, Jake leaned forward, his elbows resting on the wooden surface as he studied the holographic projections hovering above the device. The images shifted, and shimmered planets spinning lazily, stars twinkling in an endless expanse of space. It was mesmerizing, but Laura couldn't afford to lose focus. Every second counted. Cale sat nearby, curled up on a chair with a blanket draped over his shoulders. His glowing eyes were fixed on the device, his expression a mix of longing and determination. Occasionally he would reach out to touch it, making small adjustments that caused the hologram to flicker or change. Laura watched him closely, marveling at how intuitive he seemed with the technology. Whatever this device was, clearly meant something important to him, possibly to his people. "You said this thing can contact his family?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. He glanced at Cale, then back at Laura. "How does it work?" "Don't know," Laura admitted, shaking her head. "It's not exactly user-friendly. But when I pressed one of the symbols earlier, it sent some kind of signal. That's why those men are after us. They must have detected it." Jake frowned, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "If it sent a signal, then someone should be responding." "Right. So why haven't we heard anything yet?" Laura hesitated. She didn't have an answer. Maybe the signal hadn't reached its destination, or maybe Cale's people were too far away to respond quickly. Either way, they were running out of time. The soldiers Zor, whoever they were, wouldn't give up easily. They'd already proven that much. "We need to figure out how to boost the signal," she said finally. "Make it stronger, clearer. Otherwise, we're just sitting ducks." Jake nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the tools scattered across the room. "All right, let's start by taking this thing apart, see if we can understand how it works." Laura's stomach tightened at the suggestion. What if they damaged it? What if they made things worse? But what choice did they have? Sitting around waiting wasn't going to save them. With a reluctant sigh, she slid the device toward Jake. "Be careful," she warned. "We can't afford to mess this up." "Don't worry," Jake replied, grabbing a screwdriver from the counter. I'll take it slow." As Jake began examining the device, Laura turned her attention to Cale. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, kneeling beside him. "This is a lot to handle, isn't it?" Cale tilted his head, his luminous eyes meeting hers. He let out a soft hum, low and melodic, as if trying to reassure her. Then he pointed at the device, gesturing toward the hologram. Laura understood immediately. He trusted them. He believed they could fix it. She smiled faintly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get you home," she promised. I swear, for the next several hours, the three of them worked together, or as close to together as possible. Given their differences, Jake focused on disassembling the device, carefully removing panels and inspecting circuits that glowed faintly with an otherworldly energy. Laura assisted where she could, handing him tools or holding pieces steady while he worked. Meanwhile, Cale stayed close, watching intently and occasionally pointing out specific parts of the device that seemed important. "It's incredible," Jake muttered at one point, holding up a small crystal embedded in the device's core. It pulsed with light, casting rainbow-colored reflections across the room. "This thing doesn't run on electricity, at least not the kind we use. It's something else entirely." "What do you mean?" Laura asked, leaning closer. "I mean, this tech is way beyond anything humans have ever built," Jake explained, his voice tinged with awe. "Whoever made this, they're centuries ahead of us, maybe more." The realization sent a shiver down Laura's spine. She'd known Cale wasn't human, but seeing tangible proof of just how advanced his species was hit her in a way. Words never could. These weren't just aliens. They were gods compared to humanity. By the time Jake finished dismantling the device, dawn was breaking outside. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the cluttered interior of the cabin. Laura stretched stiffly, her muscles sore from hours of tension. Cale yawned softly, his tiny frame slumping with exhaustion. Even Jake looked worn out, though his expression remained focused. "So," Laura prompted, gesturing toward the disassembled device. "Can you fix it?" Jake hesitated, setting down his tools. "I think so, but it's going to take some improvisation. We don't have the right equipment here, not even close. If we want to boost the signal, we'll need to rig something up using what I've got lying around." "Like what?" Laura asked, glancing at the piles of gadgets and spare parts scattered across the room. "A satellite dish." "For starters," Jake replied, "something to direct the signal outward. A power source strong enough to amplify it. My generator might work, but it'll drain fast. After that," he shrugged, "we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Laura nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a plan. "Let's get started," she said. Firmly, over the next few hours, they transformed Jake's workshop into a makeshift lab. Using scraps of metal and wires, they constructed a crude antenna, attaching it to the device with duct tape and improvised connectors. Cale helped where he could, his small hands surprisingly dexterous as he guided them through certain steps. When they hooked the device up to Jake's generator, the entire setup vibrated with energy, the hologram flaring brightly as if alive. "That's it," Jake said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Now, all we can do is wait." But waiting wasn't easy not. With danger closing in, as the day wore on, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Distant voices echoed through the forest, accompanied by the crunch of boots and the occasional bark of orders. Laura peered out the window nervously, her heart pounding every time she spotted movement among the trees. "They're getting closer," she whispered, turning to Jake. "What do we do if they find us?" Jake's jaw tightened as he considered the question. "We fight," he said simply. "Or we run. Either way, we don't let them take Cale." Laura nodded grimly, her grip tightening on the rifle Jake had handed her earlier. She hated an idea of violence, but she knew he was right. If it came down to it, she wouldn't hesitate to protect K11 if it meant risking everything. As night fell, the cabin grew darker, lit only by the soft glow of the device and a single lantern. Hanging from the ceiling, outside, the forest was eerily silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Everyone was on edge, listening for any sign of trouble. Then, suddenly, the device emitted a sharp beep. The hologram shifted abruptly, displaying new coordinates and unfamiliar symbols. Cale gasped, pointing excitedly at the projection. Laura exchanged a glance with Jake, her pulse racing. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are they coming?" Before anyone could answer, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath. Their feet, the windows rattled violently and the lights flickered. Outside, the sky erupted into a kaleidoscope of blues, greens, and purples swirling overhead like a cosmic storm. A massive shadow loomed above the treetops, blocking out the stars. "They're here," Laura breathed, her eyes wide with awe. They actually came. "Ugh!" Cale let out a joyful hum, clutching the device tightly. For the first time since she'd found him, he looked truly happy, hopeful. Even Laura felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she realized what this moment meant. Help had arrived. Cale was going home, but their relief was short-lived. From the forest came the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Bright flashes illuminated the trees as bullets whizzed past the cabin, striking the walls and shattering windows. Laura ducked instinctively, pulling Cale to the floor. Jake grabbed his own weapon, crouching near the door with a fierce look in his eyes. "They found us," cocking his rifle. "Stay down." The soldiers, whoever they were shouting now, their voices filled with urgency. Laura clutched Cale tightly, shielding him with her body. Above them, the alien ship descended lower, its engines roaring like thunder.
Ow.
Beams of light shot down from the craft, illuminating the clearing around the cabin. "We need to move," Jake shouted over the noise. "Now," Laura nodded, scrambling to her feet. She grabbed Cale's hand and followed Jake toward the door, her heart pounding wildly. Outside, chaos reigned. Soldiers fired blindly at the ship, their weapons useless against its impenetrable hull. The air crackled with energy as the ship, unleashed a pulse that knocked everyone off their feet, including Laura and Jake. When the dust settled, Laura looked up to see figures emerging from the ship. Tall and regal, they bore a striking resemblance to Kale, though their features were sharper, more refined. Their skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Their eyes glowed with the same ethereal light. Kale let out a cry of joy, breaking free from Laura's grasp and running toward them. One of the figures knelt down, embracing him warmly. Tears streamed down Laura's face as she watched the reunion, her heart swelling with emotion. "They're safe," she whispered, sinking to her knees. "He's safe." Jake stood beside her, his rifle lowered. "Looks like your job here is done," he said quietly. "You did good, Laura." She nodded, unable to speak. As the alien figures led Kale back toward the ship, one of them paused, turning to face Laura. Its expression was unreadable, but its eyes see. Document. Part 5. The forest was alive with chaos. Laura's feet pounded against the damp earth as she clutched Kale's hand tightly, pulling him along behind her. Every step felt like a gamble branches snagged at her clothes. Roots threatened to trip her, and the darkness of the woods pressed in on all sides. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. The shouts from the cabin were growing louder, closer, echoing through the trees like a predator closing in. Behind them, flashlights cut through the shadows, their beams bouncing wildly as the pursuers fanned out. Laura risked a glance over her shoulder and saw figures moving quickly, their silhouettes sharp against the dim light. They weren't just men, they were soldiers, armed and determined. The sight sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through her veins. "Keep going," she whispered to Kale, though he didn't need encouragement. His small legs churned furiously, keeping pace with hers despite his size. In his free hand, he clutched the glowing device, its hum growing louder with each passing second. It was their lifeline now, the only thing standing between them and capture. Laura pushed forward, her lungs burning as she fought to stay ahead. She knew these woods better than anyone else. Every twist and turn had been etched into her memory. After years of hiking, that knowledge gave her an edge, but it wasn't enough. Her pursuers were too close, too relentless. She could hear their voices shouting orders, their boots crashing through the underbrush. "We can't let them get away." One voice barked, harsh and commanding. "Find them." Laura ducked under a low-hanging branch, dragging Kale with her. They darted into a narrow ravine, its steep walls providing some cover. For a moment, the sounds of pursuit faded, muffled by the dense foliage above. Laura paused, crouching low and pressing a finger to her lips. Kale nodded, his wide eyes filled with trust and fear. "They're still coming," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "We have to keep moving. But where?" The forest stretched endlessly around them, offering no clear escape route. Laura's mind raced as she tried to think of a plan. If they stayed on foot, they'd be caught within minutes. Even if they reached the edge of the woods, there was nowhere to go. The nearest town was miles away. They'd never make it without being spotted. Then she remembered something. Jake Monroe. Jake was a recluse who lived off-grid, tucked away in a remote corner of the forest. Laura had met him once during a hike, and though he wasn't exactly friendly, he struck her as someone who valued privacy above all else. If anyone could help them disappear, it was him. The problem was getting there without being seen. Taking a deep breath, Laura turned to Kale. "We're going to find a friend," she said softly. "He might be able to help us. We have to be very quiet, okay?" Kale nodded again, his grip tightening slightly on her hand. Together, they crept along the base of the ravine, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. The device in Kale's hand pulsed faintly, casting an eerie glow that Laura tried to shield with her body. Above them, the unnatural colors in the sky continued to swirl, painting the forest in hues of green and gold. It was beautiful, but also terrifying, a reminder of the forces converging on them, after what felt like hours. They reached a shallow stream cutting through the ravine. Laura hesitated, glancing upstream and downstream. Water would mask their scent, making it harder for the soldiers or whatever they were to track them. but crossing it would leave visible footprints on the opposite bank. "We don't have a choice," she muttered, more to herself than to Cale. With a quick motion, she stepped into the icy water, wincing as it soaked through her boots. Cale followed closely, his movements careful and deliberate. They waded across the stream, the current tugging gently at their legs, then scrambled up the far bank and disappeared into the trees. The detour cost them precious time. By the time they emerged from the ravine, the sounds of pursuit had grown. Alarmingly close again. Lara could hear voices shouting coordinates, the crunch of footsteps drawing nearer with each passing second. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the forest for any sign of Jake's cabin. And then finally, she saw a flicker of light in the distance, barely visible through the trees. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As they approached, she noticed movement near the cabin. Two figures stood outside, their outlines illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. One of them held a rifle, its barrel glinting in the moonlight. Lara froze, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Had the soldiers beaten them here? Or was Jake simply protecting his home? "Stay here," she whispered to Cale, crouching behind a thick tree trunk. "I'll check." She slipped forward cautiously, her hands raised to show she wasn't armed. When she was close enough to see clearly, she recognized Jake immediately. Hadn't changed much since their last encounter, still wiry and weathered, with a scruffy beard and piercing blue eyes. The man beside him, however, was unfamiliar. Younger, taller, and carrying himself with an air of authority, he looked like trouble. "Who's there?" Jake called out sharply, raising his lantern. The light caught Laura's face, and his expression shifted from suspicion to recognition. "Laura, what are you doing out here?" Before she could answer, the other man stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "You're not alone," he said, his tone accusatory. "Who's with you?" Laura swallowed hard, glancing back toward the trees where Cale was hiding. She couldn't reveal him not yet, not until she knew whether Jake could be trusted. "It's just me," she lied, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "I got lost. I thought maybe you could help." Jake frowned, clearly skeptical. "Lost? Out here? At night? That doesn't sound like you." "I know it's strange," Laura admitted, taking a cautious step closer, "but I really need your help. Please." For a long moment, Jake studied her, his gaze sharp and calculating. Then he glanced at his companion, who shrugged and lowered his weapon slightly. "Fine," Jake said gruffly. "Come inside, but if you're lying to me, not," Laura assured him quickly. "You." As they entered the cabin, Laura kept one eye on the door, waiting for the right moment to retrieve Cale. The interior was sparse but functional, with tools and gadgets scattered across every surface. A generator hummed softly in the corner. Powering a single overhead light, it was clear that Jake valued self-sufficiency, which gave Laura hope that he might understand her predicament. Once they were settled, Laura began to explain carefully, leaving out certain details. She told him about finding Cale in the woods, how he was injured and scared, and how someone was hunting them. She didn't mention aliens or holograms or glowing devices. Instead, framing the story as vaguely as possible, Jake listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You've got yourself into quite a mess," he said finally. "Why should I stick my neck out for you?" "'Cause it's the right thing to do," Laura replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Because no one deserves to be hunted like an animal. And because, if you don't help us, they'll find us anyway, and then you'll have to deal with them too." Jake considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Bring your friend in." Relief flooded through Laura as she hurried outside to retrieve Cale. When she returned with him, Jake's eyes widened slightly, though he didn't say anything. Instead, he gestured for them to sit, his demeanor softening ever so slightly. "So," he said after a pause, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" Laura hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But Cale saved her the trouble, without prompting. He held up the device, its glow illuminating the room. Holographic images sprang to life, filling the space with swirling galaxies and distant planets. Jake stared slack-jawed. while the other man instinctively reached for his gun. Easy. Jake snapped, waving him off. Put it away. This isn't what I thought it was. What is it then? The man demanded, his voice tense. It's complicated, Laura said quietly. But we need your help. If we can fix this device, we might be able to contact Kale's people. Get him home. Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his eyes never leaving the hologram. He realized how insane. This sounds right? I know, Laura admitted, but it's true. And if we don't act fast, those men will catch up to us. They won't stop until they have him. Jake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said at last. Let's see what we can do. With that simple agreement, Laura felt a spark of hope ignite within her. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time in days she had allies. Together they might stand a chance against whatever was coming. Outside, the forest remained eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Inside, the hum of the device grew steadier, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the stars, help was on the way. All they had to do was survive long enough to meet it. Document. Part 2. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Laura stood by the table, watching as the alien child Kale. She decided to call him slowly explored his new surroundings. Movements were cautious, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether it was safe to touch anything. Laura couldn't blame him. After everything he'd been through, trust probably felt like a foreign concept. She grabbed a blanket from the couch and draped it over his thin shoulders. Kale flinched at first, but then relaxed when he realized it wasn't a threat. The fabric seemed strange to him. He poked at it curiously with his long fingers before wrapping it tighter around himself. Laura smiled faintly, though her mind was racing. What was she supposed to do now? She couldn't exactly walk into town and ask for advice on how to care for an extraterrestrial child. First things first, she thought. Food, water, shelter, basic needs. Laura rummaged through her pantry, pulling out items that might be edible, or at least tolerable for someone who didn't come from Earth. There wasn't much variety in her supplies. Canned soup, crackers, a few pieces of fruit, and some instant noodles. She settled on bananas, figuring they were simple enough. Peeling one, she held it out toward Kale. Here, she said gently, try this. Kale tilted his head, studying the banana as if it were some kind of puzzle. After a moment, he reached out and took it, sniffing cautiously before taking a small bite. His expression shifted subtly, not quite pleasure, but not disgust either. Encouraged, Laura opened a bottle of water and handed it to him next. That's better, right? She asked, even though she knew he wouldn't understand. Still, talking felt natural, like she was trying to bridge the gap between them somehow. While Kale ate, Laura examined him more closely. He was smaller than she'd initially thought, no taller than a human toddler. His skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, shifting colors ever so slightly depending on the angle. It reminded her of oil slicks on water, beautiful but otherworldly. His eyes, large and luminous, dominated his face, giving him an almost ethereal appearance, but there were signs of injury too. A dark bruise marred the side of his neck, and his left arm hung limply at his side. Laura frowned, guilt tugging at her chest. Whoever or whatever had hurt him hadn't shown any mercy. She needed to help him heal, but she had no idea where to start. I'll figure something out, she murmured, more to herself than to Kale. We'll get you fixed up. For now, though, she focused on making him comfortable. She cleared a space on the couch, laying down another blanket and propping up a pillow. When she gestured for him to sit, Kale hesitated, his glowing eyes darting between her and the makeshift bed. Finally, he shuffled over and sat down gingerly, clutching the blanket around him like a shield. Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. This was insane, completely, utterly insane. She was harboring an alien in her cabin, risking God knows what consequences if anyone found out. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. There was something about Kayla's vulnerability, his innocence that tugged at her heartstrings. Ow! He wasn't dangerous. He was just lost, scared, and alone. As the hours passed, Laura noticed subtle changes in Kale's behavior. At first, he barely moved, staying huddled on the couch as if afraid to draw attention to himself. But gradually, he began to relax. Watched her intently as she moved around the room, his gaze following her every step. Occasionally, he made soft humming sounds, low and melodic, almost like music. It was strange but oddly comforting. Like he was trying to communicate without words. One of those hums caught Laura's attention later that evening. She turned to see Cale pointing at the flashlight she'd left on the table. His expression was curious, almost eager. "You want to see that?" she asked, picking it up. She clicked it on, shining the beam across the room. Cale's eyes widened, and he let out a delighted hum, clapping his hands softly. It was such a childlike reaction that Laura couldn't help but laugh. "Well, I guess we found something you like," she said, smiling. For a moment, the weight of the situation lifted, replaced by a sense of wonder. This wasn't just an alien, it was a kid, plain and simple. A kid who happened to be from another world, but reality soon intruded again. As night fell, Laura became acutely aware of how vulnerable they both were. Her cabin was isolated, yes, but that didn't mean they were completely safe. If anyone discovered Khalif, the wrong people came looking, they'd be in serious trouble. She needed to keep him hidden, at least until she figured out what to do next. With that in mind, Laura closed all the curtains and turned off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp on in the corner. She checked the door twice to make sure. It was locked, then pulled out her phone to check for news updates. Nothing unusual had been reported locally, which was both reassuring and unsettling. How could something like this happen without anyone noticing? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind her. Turning, she saw Cale standing near the couch, holding out the empty banana peel. He looked expectant, as if waiting for further instructions. "Oh, right," Laura said, taking the peel from him. "Thanks for cleaning up." Cale tilted his head, clearly confused. Laura mimed throwing the peel into the trash can, hoping he'd understand. To her surprise, he nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Maybe. He was smarter than she'd given him credit for. Over the next few days, Laura settled into a routine of sorts. She kept Cale indoors, teaching him basic rules. Don't go near the windows. Don't make noise, and doing her best to care for him. She cleaned his injuries with antiseptic wipes, wincing whenever he winced, and fashioned a makeshift splint for his injured arm using materials from her first aid kit. She fed him fruits, vegetables, and bland foods, experimenting to see what he liked and what he didn't. Bananas remained a favorite. Along with applesauce and plain crackers, communication proved challenging, but not impossible. Cale seemed to pick up on tone and body language quickly, responding to smiles and gentle gestures. He started mimicking her actions, learning how to open doors, use utensils, and even play simple games like stacking blocks. Each small victory filled Laura with a mix of pride and awe. This wasn't just survival, it was connection. Still there were moments of tension. One afternoon, while Laura was outside gathering firewood, she heard a loud crash from inside the cabin. Panicking, she rushed back in to find Cale crouched on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass. He'd accidentally knocked over a picture frame, and now he looked absolutely terrified, his glowing eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Laura said quickly, kneeling beside him. "It's just an accident. You're fine." She swept up the shards carefully, making sure he didn't cut himself, and disposed of them in the trash. Then she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "See? All better." Cale let out a shaky hum, his tiny shoulders relaxing slightly. Slowly, he reached out and touched her hand as if to say thank you. The gesture was so earnest, so heartfelt, that it brought tears to Laura's eyes. Despite the challenges, Laura found herself growing attached to Cale. He wasn't just a responsibility anymore. He was part of her life, however temporary that might be. She began to wonder about his world, his family, the circumstances that had brought him here. Was he missed? Were they looking for him? Questions swirled in her mind, unanswered but persistent. Then, one evening, something changed. Laura was sitting at the table reading a book when Cale approached her, holding something in his hands. It was a small device, metallic and intricately designed, unlike anything she'd ever seen before. He placed it on the table and stepped back, watching her expectantly. "What is this?" Laura asked, picking it up. It was cool to the touch, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly under the lamplight. She pressed a button experimentally. Suddenly the room was bathed in a holographic display, a swirling galaxy. Planets spinning lazily in orbit. Laura gasped, nearly dropping the device. "Is this your home?" Cale hummed softly, nodding. His eyes lit up with excitement, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed truly animated. He pointed at one of the planets, a shimmering blue orb with rings of crystal circling it. Then he tapped his chest, repeating the gesture several times. "You're from there," Laura said, understanding dawning on her. "It's your planet, Cale." Nodded again, his expression hopeful. Laura stared at the hologram, her heart pounding. This was more than just a glimpse into another world. It was proof that Cale belonged somewhere else, somewhere far beyond Earth, somewhere he needed to return to, but how? And when? Those questions loomed large, daunting, and uncertain. Yet as Laura looked at Cale, she felt a renewed determination. She had promised to protect him, and she intended to keep that promise even if it meant facing the unknown. For now. Though they were safe. Together, in the quiet solitude of the cabin, they had formed a bond that transcended language, species, and worlds. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Laura felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Document. Part for the days that followed were tense and exhausting. Laura spent most of her time watching the woods, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. She barely slept, jumping at every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. Cale stayed, close to her side, his wide eyes constantly darting toward the windows as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. The once peaceful cabin now felt like a fortress under siege. Laura knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, whoever or whatever was out there would find them. And when that happened, she wanted to be ready. But how do you prepare for something you don't understand? Her mind raced with questions. Who was hunting Cale? Why? And what did they want with him? One afternoon, while Cale napped on the couch, Laura decided to take another look at the device he'd shown, the one that projected the holographic map of his homeworld. She had avoided touching it since their first encounter, afraid of accidentally triggering something dangerous. But now, desperate for answers, she picked it up carefully and set it on the table. The device hummed faintly in response, its surface glowing brighter as she examined it. Without meaning to, she pressed one of the symbols etched into its side. Instantly, the room filled with light as the hologram reappeared, larger and more detailed than before. Planets floated lazily in midair, each one labeled with unfamiliar characters that shimmered like liquid silver. Cale stirred awake at the sound, sitting up quickly. When he saw the hologram, his expression shifted from alarm to curiosity. He climbed down from the couch and approached the projection, his tiny hands reaching out to touch the glowing images. Laura watched closely, fascinated by his reactions. "Is this your home?" she asked softly, pointing at the blue planet with crystalline rings circling it. Cale nodded eagerly, tapping the image repeatedly. Then he pointed at himself and made a sweeping gesture, as if describing something vast and important. "You're from there," Laura said, understanding dawning on her. "That's where you belong." Cale hummed in agreement, his eyes lighting up with excitement. For a brief moment, he seemed less like a frightened child and more like a proud ambassador of his species.
Oh.
But then his expression darkened, and he pointed at the drone Laura had found earlier. His gestures became urgent, mimicking the same weapon motion he'd used before. "They attacked you," Laura guessed, her voice tight with anger. "That's why you crashed here." Cale nodded solemnly, his shoulders slumping. He tapped the hologram again, but this time, he pointed at a different planet, red, jagged world surrounded by swirling clouds of dust. Unlike the serene beauty of his homeworld, this planet looked hostile and forbidding. "Who lives there?" Laura asked, though she already suspected the answer. Cale didn't respond directly, instead making aggressive motions with his hands, as if depicting conflict or war. It wasn't hard to piece together the story. Two civilizations locked in a struggle, with Kale caught in the middle. Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. This was bigger than she'd imagined, far beyond anything she could have prepared for. Kale wasn't just a lost child. It was part of something much larger, a piece in a cosmic puzzle she barely understood. And yet, despite the enormity of the situation, she felt a growing determination to help him. "We need to get you back," she said firmly, looking at Kale. "Back to your people. They'll know what to do." Kale tilted his head, clearly unsure whether to believe her. She couldn't blame him. They were stranded on Earth, hunted by unknown enemies, with no clear way to reach his homeworld. Even if they managed to repair his ship, which lay broken and useless in the forest, they had no idea how to operate it. But Laura refused to give up. If there was even a small chance of getting Kale home, she owed it to him to try. She turned back to the device, studying it intently. There had to be some kind of clue, some hidden function that could guide them. As she traced her fingers over its surface, another symbol lit up, and the hologram shifted abruptly. This time, instead of planets, the projection displayed scenes images of towering crystalline structures, lush landscapes, and beings who looked similar to Kale but taller and more regal. Laura gasped, captivated by the vision of an advanced civilization unlike anything humanity had ever dreamed of. In one sequence, a group of aliens stood around what appeared to be a control panel, manipulating glowing orbs of energy. Another showed a fleet of sleek ships soaring through space, leaving trails of light behind them. Then, suddenly, the scene changed. Explosions erupted across the screen, shattering the peaceful imagery. Ships burned, cities crumbled, and figures fled in terror. The final image froze on a massive vessel descending toward a battlefield, its weapons blazing. Laura's stomach churned as she realized what she was seeing, a glimpse of the war that had driven Kale's ship to Earth. When the hologram faded, silence filled the room. Laura glanced at Kale, whose face was pale and drawn. He reached out hesitantly, touching the device as if trying to comfort it or perhaps himself. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder, offering what little reassurance she could. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't realize." Kale shook his head, gesturing toward the device again. This time, he pointed at one specific symbol, a looping swirl that pulsed faintly among the others. Laura frowned, unsure what he meant. Was it a message? A command? Or maybe a signal? Taking a deep breath, she pressed the symbol. At first, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to emanate from the device, growing louder and more insistent. The air around them vibrated slightly, and the lights in the cabin flickered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending leaves spiraling through the air. "What's happening?" Laura whispered, clutching the edge of the table. Kale stepped closer to her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. His eyes were fixed on the device, glowing brighter with anticipation. Before she could react further, a sharp crack echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. Heavy boots crunched against the gravel outside, accompanied by voices speaking in clipped tones. Laura's heart sank as she recognized the rhythm of authority, the kind that came with badges and guns. "They're here," she breathed, panic rising in her chest. She grabbed Kale's hand and pulled him toward the back door, her mind racing. They couldn't stave, they had to run. But Kale resisted, tugging gently on her arm. He pointed at the device, which was still humming loudly, its glow intensifying. Whatever signal it had sent, it was working, but not fast enough. The footsteps outside grew closer, and the sound of someone knocking on the front door sent a jolt of fear through Laura's body. "Open up," a stern voice called from the other side. "We know you're in there." Laura hesitated, torn between fight and flight. Running might buy them time, but it wouldn't solve the problem. Whoever these people were, they wouldn't stop until they found Kale. And if they did? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flash of light from the device. The hologram reappeared, this time displaying coordinates and strange symbols that pulsed rapidly. Kale let out an excited hum, pointing at the window. Outside, the sky had grown darker, streaked with unnatural colors that swirled like oil on water. "They're coming," Laura realized, her voice trembling. not the hunters but Kale's people. Somehow the device had summoned them. The knocking at the door grew louder, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. Laura tightened her grip on Kale's hand, her resolve hardening. If this was their only chance, they had to take it. "Trust me," she whispered, meeting Kale's luminous gaze. "We'll get through this." With that, she led him toward the window, throwing it open just as the front door burst inward. Shouts filled the cabin, but Laura didn't look back. Grabbing Kale, she leaped onto the porch and sprinted into the forest, the device clutched tightly in her free hand. Behind them, the swirling colors in the sky grew brighter, illuminating the trees with an otherworldly glow. As they ran, Laura felt a surge of hope mixed with dread. Help was coming, but so was danger. And in that moment, all she could do was hold on to Kale and pray they reached safety in time. Document. Part 3. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next, as Laura and Kale settled into their strange routine. The cabin felt different now, not just a quiet retreat, but a sanctuary for two beings from vastly different worlds. Laura had grown accustomed to Kale's presence, finding comfort in his curious nature and gentle demeanor. Yet, despite the growing bond between them, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with small things and occurrences that she initially dismissed as coincidences. One morning, as she prepared breakfast, the lights flickered unexpectedly. She glanced at Kale, who was sitting quietly on the couch, but he seemed just as surprised as she was. Another time, while tidying up the kitchen, a spoon slid off the counter and landed upright on the floor, balanced perfectly on its handle. Laura stared at it for a moment before picking it up, chalking it up to a fluke. But then there were the shadows. Late at night, when the cabin was dark and silent, Laura would catch fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was her imagination, or perhaps an animal outside brushing against the window. But when she turned to look, there was nothing there, just empty space and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. One evening, she sat by the fireplace reading a book. The sensation became impossible to ignore. The air around her seemed charged, tingling faintly against her skin. She looked up to see Kale standing near the center of the room, his hands raised slightly as if reaching for something invisible. His eyes were closed, and his lips moved silently, forming shapes that made no sound. "Kale," Laura called softly, setting her book aside. "What are you doing?" He didn't respond, but the objects around him began to tremble. A glass on the table vibrated gently, then tipped over without being touched. The fire in the hearth roared, suddenly flames leaping higher than they should have before settling back down. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending leaves swirling across the porch. Laura stood quickly, her heart racing. "Kale, stop," she said. Louder this time. Whether he understood her words or simply sensed her fear, he lowered his hands and opened his eyes. The tension in the air dissipated instantly, leaving behind an eerie calm. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Laura's mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Was Kale responsible? Had he somehow caused those strange phenomena? And if so, what did that mean? She approached him cautiously, kneeling down to meet his gaze. "Did you do that?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Kale tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, he reached out and placed his hand on hers. A warm sensation spread through her fingers, like sunlight on her skin. Images flashed briefly in her mind. A starry sky, glowing crystals, a sense of vastness and connection. Laura pulled her hand away, startled. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "That's new." Over the next few days, Laura kept a close watch on Kale, trying to understand the extent of his abilities. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes the changes were subtle, like the way plants seemed to grow faster in his presence, or how electronic devices occasionally malfunctioned when he was nearby. Other times, the effects were more dramatic, like the night he accidentally shattered every light bulb in the cabin with a single wave of his hand. Despite the chaos, Laura refused to let fear take hold. Instead, She focused on finding ways to help Kale control whatever power he possessed. She taught him simple exercises, encouraging him to focus his energy on harmless tasks like lighting candles or moving small objects. Progress was slow, but Kale's determination never wavered. He practiced tirelessly, his glowing eyes filled with concentration. Still, the question lingered in the back of Laura's mind. Why was this happening now? Kale hadn't shown any signs of these abilities. When she first found him, was it because he was healing, growing stronger, or was it something else entirely? Her concerns deepened when she noticed unusual activity outside the cabin. Footsteps crunched in the underbrush late at night, too heavy to belong to deer or other wildlife. Shadows moved among the trees, darker than they should have been under the moonlight. Once, she even caught sight of headlights sweeping across the distant hills. No vehicles ever appeared on the narrow dirt road leading to her home. Someone or something was watching them. Laura tightened her grip on the rifle she kept. Above the fireplace, though, she hated the thought of using it. She'd always been a pacifist, someone who preferred books to weapons. But now, with Kale depending on her, she knew she had to be ready for anything. Stay inside, she told Kale firmly one afternoon, as she prepared to venture out for supplies. No matter what happens, don't come looking for me. Kale hummed softly, his brow furrowed with worry. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Laura smiled despite herself. I'll be fine, she said. Just promise me you'll stay safe. With a final glance at the device he'd shown her, the holographic map of his homeworld, she stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind her. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of birds and insects replaced by an oppressive stillness. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of unseen eyes bore down on her shoulders. At the edge of the clearing, she paused, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. That's when she saw a glint of metal, partially hidden. Beneath a cluster of bushes, crouching down, she brushed aside the leaves to reveal a small drone, its camera lens cracked, but still functional. A chill ran down her spine. Whoever was spying on them wasn't far away. Back at the cabin, Laura shared her discovery with Kale, showing him the damaged drone. His reaction was immediate and intense. He backed away, his glowing eyes wide with alarm. When she tried to explain what it meant, he shook his head vigorously, making urgent humming sounds. You're scared? Laura realized aloud. You know what this is? Kale nodded, pointing at the drone and then toward the sky. Laura frowned, piecing together his meaning. They're looking for you, she said slowly. Your people, he hesitated, then shook his head again. This time his gestures were sharper, more insistent. He pointed at the drone, then mimicked holding a weapon, aiming it at an imaginary target. Not your people, Laura concluded. Grimly, someone else. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. If the crash hadn't been an accident, if Kale's ship had been attacked, it meant they weren't dealing with friendly forces. Whoever had targeted him might still be hunting him. And now they were closing in. Laura paced the room, her thoughts spinning. They needed a plan, but what could they possibly do against an enemy they didn't understand? She glanced at Kale, who was watching her intently, his expression a mix of fear and trust. Whatever happened next. She knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let anyone hurt him. We'll figure this out, she said, forcing confidence into her voice. Together. Kale hummed softly, his posture relaxing slightly. He reached out and touched her arm, the warmth of his hand grounding her in the moment. For all the uncertainty ahead, Laura took solace in one undeniable truth. They were in this together, bound by a bond that transcended language and species. As night fell, Laura reinforced the cabin's defenses, blocking the windows and checking the locks multiple times. She set up makeshift alarms using string and cans, ensuring they'd have some warning if anyone approached. Finally, exhausted but unable to sleep, she sat by the fire with Kale curled up beside her, outside the forest. Remained eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Inside, the soft crackle of the flames provided a fragile illusion of safety. Laura wrapped an arm around Cale, pulling him closer. No matter what came next, she vowed to protect him, to give him a chance to return to his world, where he truly belonged. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to survive until then. Document. Part 1. The sun was setting over the dense forest in Montana, casting long shadows across the ground. Laura Bennett tightened the straps of her backpack and adjusted her hiking boots. She loved this time of day. The air was crisp, and the woods were quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirp of a bird. It was peaceful here, far away from the noise and chaos of her life back in town. She had come to the forest to clear her mind. Work had been stressful lately, and she needed a break. The trail she was on wasn't one of the popular ones. It was narrow and winding, leading deeper into the wilderness where few people ventured. That suited Laura just fine. She preferred solitude, especially on days like today when all she wanted was to escape the world for a little while. As she walked, her thoughts drifted. She thought about her job at the local library, the stack of overdue books waiting to be returned, and the neighbor's dog that barked incessantly every morning. But soon, even those mundane worries faded as the beauty of the forest enveloped her. Towering pine trees stretched toward the sky, their needles whispering softly in the breeze. The scent of earth and moss filled the air, grounding her in the present moment. It was then that she noticed something unusual ahead, a faint glow emanating from between the trees. At first, she thought it might be sunlight reflecting off a stream, or maybe someone's camping lantern. But as she drew closer, the light grew brighter, pulsing with an otherworldly blue hue. Her footsteps slowed, curiosity mingling with caution. What could it be? Pushing aside a cluster of low-hanging branches, Laura stepped into a small clearing and froze. In the center of the open space lay a strange object, half buried in the dirt. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Sleek and metallic, its surface shimmered as if alive, shifting colors subtly under the fading sunlight. The glowing light came from within, spilling out through cracks in the structure. Laura's heart began to race. Was this some kind of experimental aircraft? A drone gone rogue? Or something else entirely? She glanced around, half expecting to see scientists or military personnel nearby, but the forest remained eerily silent. Whatever this thing was, it seemed abandoned or, at least, unattended. Taking a deep breath, Laura approached cautiously. Up close, the object looked damaged, its smooth surface marred by scorch marks and dents. One side was crumpled inward, as though it had crashed violently. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. It hummed faintly beneath her touch, sending a shiver down her spine. And then she heard it, a soft sound. Barely audible over the rustling leaves, it was almost like a whimper, high-pitched and fragile. Laura straightened, her eyes scanning the area. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. No response came, but the sound repeated itself, louder this time. Following the noise, Laura circled around to the opposite side of the object. There, huddled in the shadows, was a figure. Small and slight, it was difficult to make out at first. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized it wasn't human. Skin, if you could call it, that was pale and translucent, shimmering faintly like the object behind it. Large almond-shaped eyes dominated its face, glowing faintly with the same blue light. Thin limbs curled protectively around its body. It flinched visibly as Laura approached. For a moment, Laura simply stared, unable to process what she was seeing. An alien. Right here, in the middle of nowhere. Mind raced with questions. But they were quickly drowned out by a single, overwhelming emotion: compassion. This creature, this child, judging by its size, was clearly injured and terrified. It didn't pose a threat. It needed help. "Hey," Laura said softly, crouching down a few feet away. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Was gentle, reassuring, though she doubted the creature understood her words. Still, the tone seemed to have an effect. The alien's wide eyes locked onto hers, and after a long pause, it let out another soft whimper. Laura hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should she leave it here? Call for help? Something told her that neither option would end well. If anyone else found this creature, scientists, soldiers, whoever, they wouldn't treat it kindly. They'd lock it up, study it, dissect it. Thought made her stomach churn. No, she decided. She couldn't let that happen. Whatever this being was, it deserved better than that. Reaching into her backpack, Laura pulled out a water bottle and held it out cautiously. Here, she said, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. You look thirsty? The alien watched her warily, its head tilting slightly to one side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with hesitant movements, it extended a thin arm and took the bottle. Its fingers, long and delicate, trapped around the plastic awkwardly, as if it had never held anything like it before. After a moment, it brought the bottle to its mouth and drank greedily, spilling water down its chin. Laura smiled despite herself. Easy there, she murmured. There's plenty more where that came from. Once the bottle was empty, the alien set it down carefully, its glowing eyes meeting hers again. There was intelligence in that gaze, Laura realized. Fear, yes, but also awareness. This wasn't some mindless animal, it was sentient, capable of thought and emotion. I need to get you somewhere safe, Laura said, more to herself than to the creature, but we can't stay here. Someone will find us. Glancing back at the damaged object, she wondered how it had ended up in this remote part of the forest. Had it fallen from the sky? Crashed during some kind of malfunction? And why had no one noticed? Surely such an event would have drawn attention, but now wasn't the time for answers. Laura stood and gestured for the alien to follow her. Come on, she urged. We've got to go. Doc, the creature hesitated, glancing nervously at the wreckage behind it. Finally, with a resigned sigh, or what sounded like one, it climbed unsteadily to its feet and shuffled after her. Its movements were jerky and uncertain, as though it was still recovering from whatever trauma it had endured. Leading the way back toward the trail, Laura kept a close eye on her new companion. Every step felt surreal, like she was living in a dream, more a nightmare. Yet somehow, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. This creature needed her, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she felt compelled to protect it. As they moved deeper into the forest, the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, plunging the world into twilight. Laura switched on a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. Behind her, the alien stumbled occasionally, but managed to keep up, its luminous eyes guiding it forward. By the time they reached Laura's cabin, a modest wooden structure nestled at the edge of the woods, both were exhausted. Laura unlocked the door and ushered the alien inside, closing it firmly behind them. The warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the chill of the night outside. Welcome home, she said with a tired smile, though she doubted the alien understood. For now, anyway. Setting her backpack on the table, Laura turned to face her unexpected guest. It stood uncertainly near the door, its large eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Despite everything, Laura couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could figure this out. But one thing was certain: her life would never be the same again.